Hey guys, tonight we step into a valley tucked deep in the mountains of northern Vietnam. You're not flying in, you're trudging along on muddy tracks, the kind of path where your shoes never quite dry, and every step makes that squelchy sound. The year is 1954, and this little valley, called Điện Biên Phủ, is about to become the stage for a showdown between an empire holding on by its fingertips and a movement determined to pry those fingers off. It sounds grand, but really, if you were here in person, you'd mostly notice the damp socks, the heavy air that smells of wood smoke and wet grass, and the fact that you probably wouldn't last a day carrying the gear these soldiers lugged around. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing those time zone confessions roll in. Some of you are wide awake at 2 a.m., which feels like cheating. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in this valley, ringed by tall, forested hills that seem peaceful at first glance. But the French have chosen it not for its beauty, but because they think it's the perfect mousetrap. They've built strongpoints, bunkers, trenches, barbed wire and airstrips, convinced that if the Viet Minh attack, they can just drop in reinforcements and supplies from the sky. The valley floor is wide enough for their planes to land, or so they believe, and their fortifications stretch like a patchwork quilt of sandbags and steel. The French High Command names each cluster of bunkers after a woman: Huguette, Dominique, Eliane, Gabrielle. It's almost whimsical, like a social circle of imaginary girlfriends, except each one is stocked with artillery and machine guns. You wander from one to the next, hearing the clink of mess tins and the low murmur of tired soldiers, many of them paratroopers flown in from faraway places like Algeria or Morocco. For them, this valley is a long way from home, and the names of their strongpoints are a small comfort in a very foreign landscape. The Viet Minh, on the other hand, eye this valley from above. From the ridgelines, they see the French huddled like ants in a saucer. To them, it's not a fortress, but a trap waiting to snap shut the other way. Historians still argue whether the French underestimated the Viet Minh, or simply had no better option, clinging to Điện Biên Phủ as a last gamble to hold northern Vietnam. Either way, you're standing in a place destined for weeks of mud, fire, and exhaustion. The quirky detail you might enjoy, at least if you have a sense of humor about military hubris, is that the French, in preparing for this airland fortress, imported furniture and even wine to make the officers' quarters more civilized. Imagine that. Wicker chairs and bottles of Bordeaux set against the backdrop of bamboo forests and mosquito swarms. It's like trying to turn a camping trip into a luxury resort, only with artillery shells stacked behind the bar. As night falls, the valley hums with activity. Searchlights sweep the hills, nervous fingers grip rifles, and the jungle beyond remains dark and impenetrable. You can almost hear the insects plotting their own siege on your exposed skin. For now, it feels quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of lull that lets you breathe deeply, close your eyes, and float along the edges of history without the crash of cannon fire just yet. The French are convinced they can lure General Võ Nguyên Giap's forces down here, into what they see as a killing ground. You might even catch a few officers chuckling over their evening rations, confident that any Viet Minh assault will shatter against their strong points. They see themselves as the hunters. But as you settle deeper into the valley air, you can't shake the sense that this silence is deceptive. The hills are watching, the villagers are listening, and Giap is already planning something far more patient, far more exhausting than the French expect. This is the stage. The valley is set, the players are ready, and you're here in the quiet before the storm, where damp earth presses against your boots, and the night feels heavier than usual. You take a breath, let your shoulders sink, and prepare to walk slowly into the siege that will reshape an empire. You shift your gaze from the valley floor to the ridge lines where the real story is unfolding. Here stands General Võ Nguyên Giáp, tall, composed, and only in his early 40s, but already carrying the weight of centuries of Vietnamese resistance on his shoulders. His uniform isn't polished, his boots aren't shiny, but when he speaks, commanders listen. You stand beside him, imagining the endless calculations running through his mind. Numbers of rifles, tons of rice, miles of jungle trails, and the impossible question, how to break an enemy that believes itself unbreakable. Giap has been fighting the French for nearly a decade, but his training wasn't originally in war. You remember that quirky fact about him? He studied law and was once a teacher of history. Imagine your high school teacher suddenly becoming a military commander, except instead of handing out essays, he's orchestrating one of the largest campaigns of the century. Historians still argue whether his brilliance came from formal strategy or simply from his ability to adapt, to learn from every misstep. Either way, you can sense he carries both books and battlefields in his mind. Tonight, as lanterns glow dimly under the forest canopy, Giap listens to his staff propose the bold plan already approved by higher command. Strike fast, strike hard, and overwhelm the French before they can dig in. The phrase is Dan Nhan, Thang Nhan, fight quickly, win quickly. To the officers gathered, it sounds decisive, even romantic, like a lightning strike that will echo across the world. You imagine yourself nodding along, swept up in the vision. After all, who wouldn't want the war to end in one swift blow? But Giap isn't nodding. He's frowning, the crease between his brows deepening with each argument. He knows the valley is fortified, knows the French have aircraft, heavy artillery, and supplies stockpiled. He knows that his own soldiers are brave but young, often carrying rusty rifles or homemade grenades. To attack head-on would mean staggering losses, rivers of lives poured out into the mud. And so he paces silently, in that way that makes even seasoned officers nervous. The quirky detail. In these jungle meetings, decisions of empire and revolution are made while everyone squats on their heels around a map spread across the dirt. No polished war room, no polished table, just men crouching low, swatting at mosquitoes, sketching lines in the dust with twigs. You look at them and can't help but think, this looks more like kids planning a soccer game than generals planning a battle. And yet, this dusty circle will shape the destiny of nations. Historians still debate the exact moment Giap decided to change course. Some claim he argued instantly against quick victory. Others suggest he hesitated for days. What is clear is that he finally, painfully, overturned the plan. He ordered the entire strategy shifted to Dang Chuk, Tin Chuk. Fight steadily, advance surely. It would be slower, more grueling, but it would preserve lives and wear down the French instead of throwing his troops against walls of fire. It was not the glamorous option. It was, in fact, the boring option, the one requiring patience, digging, carrying, waiting. And yet, boring is often what wins wars. You picture yourself there, hearing the collective sigh ripple through the tent. Officers had been eager for glory, for headlines of quick triumph, and now they must tell their troops to dig, and dig some more. But Giap is firm. He has chosen endurance over spectacle. There's a quiet joke whispered among soldiers that Giap's greatest weapon isn't artillery or rifles, but time itself. If he can stretch the hours into days, the days into weeks, the enemy will collapse under the sheer boredom and exhaustion of holding out. You smile at the thought, realizing how fitting this is for your bedtime story. You, too, are surrendering to patience, inching slowly into sleep as Giap inches his forces closer to the valley. So you walk with him under the dripping leaves, past columns of porters balancing sacks of rice, past lines of soldiers sharpening shovels rather than bayonets. You feel the damp chill of the jungle at night, the distant hum of insects, and the immense calm in Giap's decision. A teacher-turned-general has chosen not to gamble lives for glory, but to grind down an empire with patience. And as you exhale into the night air, you realize patience in this valley is louder than gunfire. You follow the winding trails that snake away from the hills, tracing the arteries of an army that doesn't have trucks or railroads, but somehow keeps itself alive. These are the supply lines, the lifelines, that stretch hundreds of miles back into the Red River Delta and beyond. If you listen closely, you can hear the squeak of bicycle wheels, not in a city street, but deep in jungle mud. The impossible road to Điện Biên Phủ is not paved, not even smooth. It's a web of narrow tracks where porters carry baskets and where bicycles, stripped of seats and handles, are loaded with half a ton of rice, ammunition, and hope. You trudge alongside one of these porters, a teenager maybe, his shoulders bowed under bamboo poles. Each step lands softly on the damp ground, his breath steady, his sandals cut from old tires. He doesn't march in formation, doesn't sing a marching song. He simply endures, mile after mile, because he knows that without his sack of rice, someone in the valley will go hungry. Historians still argue whether the Viet Minh's greatest strength was strategy or logistics, but as you watch endless lines of peasants pushing bicycles that look more like overloaded mules, you start to think logistics might be the real hero. A quirky detail emerges. Some bicycles were modified with wooden struts and extra ropes so they could carry nearly 400 kilograms. Imagine a simple French-made bike, stripped of luxury, wobbling under a mountain of supplies, pushed along by one wiry porter. It's less Tour de France, more Tour de Mudslide. You chuckle quietly, because you know if you had to push one of those bikes uphill for even 5 minutes, you'd sit down in the mud and refuse to move. These porters did it for weeks. By day, the road is dangerous. French reconnaissance planes circle overhead looking for movement, and any dust or trail might give away a convoy. So the porters often travel by night, guided by the glow of fireflies, the occasional lantern shielded by hands, and the quiet rhythm of sandals on earth. You imagine walking in that silence, feeling the humidity stick to your skin, every shadow alive with the sound of frogs croaking and leaves dripping. The French officers in the valley are confident. They think their air superiority will starve the Viet Minh. But up in the hills and forests, the stream of supplies never really stops. It slows, it struggles, but it keeps flowing, like a river that refuses to dry. You imagine lying in your bed tonight, hearing the steady push of those bicycles like a lullaby, the creak, the grunt, the shuffle, an endless patient rhythm that outlasts artillery shells. Historians still debate the numbers. Some claim tens of thousands of porters carried supplies. Others say hundreds of thousands when you count the villagers who grew food, wove sandals, or boiled rice. The debate misses the point. For every soldier at Điện Biên Phủ, there were maybe 3 or 4 civilians in the background, unseen, unheard, but crucial. Without them, the guns would fall silent not because of victory, but because of hunger. There's another odd tidbit. Some supply runners chewed bits of sugarcane to stay awake on night marches. Others tied bells to their bicycles to keep track of each other in the darkness. Imagine that faint jingling drifting through the jungle, half lullaby, half survival trick. You realize that while generals draw arrows on maps, it's the small sounds of sugarcane chewing and bells in the night that really carry wars forward. You step back for a moment, breathing in the heavy night air, and notice how utterly ordinary this all feels. No grand battles yet, no fiery speeches, just mud, rice, and bicycles. And yet, in this ordinariness lies the strength of a movement. Giap knows that the French can win skirmishes, can drop bombs, can roar with engines, but they cannot outlast a people who can turn bicycles into beasts of burden and roads into veins of patience. So you keep walking with them, one sandal step at a time, feeling the weight of the baskets on your shoulders, the ache in your arms, the quiet pride of doing something simple but necessary. And as you walk, the valley grows closer, the supplies pile higher, and the French fortress below unknowingly tightens the noose around itself. You climb higher into the ridges above the valley now, following paths carved by bare feet and stubborn determination. The jungle is thick here, the kind of green that swallows sound, where every fern seems taller than you are, and every tree root looks like it's plotting to trip you. And yet, somehow, through this damp and tangled forest, men are dragging heavy artillery, actual cannons, up slopes where even walking feels exhausting. You pause to watch a team of soldiers inching a gun forward. No trucks, no engines, just ropes, pulleys, and sweat. The cannon groans as it slides on wooden rollers, the ropes creak like they're about to snap, and men lean into the slope, muscles taut. Every meter gained is celebrated like a victory. A quirky fact emerges. In some places, they had to dismantle the guns into smaller parts, carry them piece by piece, and reassemble them on the ridges. It's like trying to move a grand piano through a swamp without leaving footprints. Tedious, slow, but somehow it works. Historians still argue whether the French ever believed the Viet Minh could haul artillery into these positions. Some say French commanders dismissed the idea outright, convinced that jungle and mountains made such a feat impossible. Others suggest they suspected it but underestimated the determination. Either way, the shock was real. When shells later rained down from these ridges, the French realized too late that their supposed fortress was overlooked by hidden guns. You walk closer, brushing aside wet leaves, feeling the ground slick under your sandals. You hear the rhythmic chant of soldiers pulling in unison, voices rising and falling to keep time with the strain. It's strangely hypnotic, like a lullaby of effort. You find yourself rocking with the motion, half asleep already, as if your own breathing is tied to the pull of the ropes. Night falls, and the work doesn't stop. Lanterns glow dim behind screens of leaves, fireflies mingle with sparks from hurried repairs, and the jungle hums with insects while cannons inch upward. Some men joke quietly to ease the tension, saying things like, "At least when we fire this, it'll feel personal. We've carried it like a child." You smile at that, picturing a soldier rocking an artillery piece like a baby. Sleep deprivation does strange things to humor, and yet it keeps spirits alive. The quirky tidbit that lingers: some of the ropes used came from twisted jungle vines when proper equipment ran short. Imagine relying on plants braided by hand to haul tons of steel up a cliff. The vines groan, the steel shudders, and still somehow gravity is defeated inch by inch. You notice the contrast now. In the valley below, French officers sip wine in canvas chairs, confident in their fortress. Up here in the dripping jungle, barefoot soldiers feed on rice and salt, moving mountains, literally, so that the sky above Điện Biên Phủ will rain fire. Two worlds, only a few kilometers apart, heading for collision. Historians still debate whether Giap himself climbed these ridges to see the guns in place. Some say he inspected them personally, his boots caked with mud, nodding quietly at the ingenuity of his troops. Others claim he left the details to subordinates, focusing on the bigger picture. But the image of Giap standing on a ridge, looking down at the French fortress through the mist, is too vivid to let go. You can almost feel his calm satisfaction. The impossible is becoming possible. You settle into the damp ground, listening to the ropes stretch, the men chant, and the cannons finally settle into their hidden nests. The jungle swallows the noise quickly, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves. It's as if the forest itself is conspiring with the soldiers, holding its breath, waiting for the moment when silence will explode into thunder. For now, though, it is quiet. You feel the exhaustion of those who hauled steel for days on end, the satisfaction of seeing the barrel pointed down at the valley, and the strange comfort in knowing that patience and persistence can move mountains, or at least cannons. Your eyelids grow heavy, rocked by the rhythm of ropes and the jungle's steady hum, and the siege draws a little closer in the darkness. You wake to the sound of a low rumble, the kind that doesn't quite register as thunder, but makes the ground tremble under your feet. The cannons that were dragged into the hills, hidden under camouflage nets and leaves, are finally speaking. It's the night of March 13th, 1954, and the siege of Điện Biên Phủ is opening with a roar that rolls across the valley like the sky itself has split open. You look down at the French strongpoint of Him Lam, where searchlights stab into the darkness, and suddenly those beams vanish in bursts of fire and smoke. The French soldiers scramble, boots pounding on duckboards, helmets clanging against steel. They had believed their fortress impregnable, yet here come shells raining down from ridges they thought were safe. Historians still argue whether the French underestimated the range of the Viet Minh artillery, or whether they simply dismissed the possibility of it being hauled into those impossible positions. Either way, the shock is palpable. You stand at the edge of a trench as Viet Minh infantry begin to surge forward. They move in the darkness, hugging the earth, rushing through zigzag approaches dug over weeks. The quirky detail. Some of these soldiers wore sandals cut from tires, which left behind prints that confused trackers and were almost indestructible. Imagine running into battle with shoes that could probably outlive your entire wardrobe. You can almost hear the slap of rubber on mud as they advance. The French at Him Lam try to respond with their own artillery, but they are blinded by the jungle, their shells thudding into hillsides rather than finding targets. In the confusion, flares hiss into the sky, casting the valley in eerie green light. For a moment it feels like a stage play, actors frozen in sudden illumination, every face etched with tension. You half expect someone to whisper, "And scene." But there are no lines to follow, only the chaos of fire and fear. The Viet Minh charge is not a wave, but a tide, creeping, pulling back, and then crashing forward again. You move with them, ducking under barbed wire, feeling the tug of earthworks under your fingers. You taste gunpowder in the air, sharp and metallic, mixing with the ever-present damp of the jungle. It clings to your tongue, the way smoke from a campfire lingers long after the flames have died. At Him Lam, the defenders fight hard. Machine guns chatter, mortars thump, and for hours the outcome hangs in balance. You glance at Giap's command post in the hills, where he sits quietly, eyes fixed on the valley. He doesn't shout or wave maps, he waits, calm and composed. Historians still debate how much control he had over the minute-by-minute battle or whether local commanders acted on initiative. But the result is clear. By the early hours of March 14th, Him Lam falls. The first domino tips and the valley suddenly feels less secure. A quirky story circulates among the Viet Minh. When the first French prisoners were led out of the smoking ruins of Him Lam, some of them looked up at the ridges in disbelief, muttering, "It's impossible. How did they get guns up there?" You imagine their faces, a mix of awe and despair, like tourists staring at a magic trick they can't explain. You lean against the trench wall, heart still pounding, as dawn begins to break. The valley smells of damp soil and smoke, a scent that somehow feels both violent and oddly natural, like rain after a bonfire. Birds even begin to chirp, as if unaware that the world has changed overnight. The French officers regroup at their headquarters, maps spread on tables, voices sharp with disbelief. They had expected a quick slap against Him Lam to be repelled. Instead, they've lost one of their outer defenses in less than a night. You picture them sipping cold coffee, wrinkling their noses at the mud splattered across their boots, while above them unseen guns are already being reloaded. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the echoes of that first battle fade into the background. The siege has begun. The fortress is wounded, and the valley is no longer just a trap, it is a cage. And you, standing in the midst of it, can almost feel the long nights ahead stretching like a road into the mist. Morning settles heavy over the valley. Smoke still lingers in the damp air from the fight at Him Lam, curling like mist over blackened earthworks. You move with the French officers as they pace in their command bunker, eyes red from sleeplessness, voices clipped with urgency. They believed the Viet Minh would rush headlong and break against their defences, but Him Lam has vanished overnight, swallowed whole by Giap's patient assault. Colonel de Castries, the French commander here, leans over maps spread across a desk. His hands drum nervously on the paper, the rhythm out of step with his calm words. He insists the fortress still holds, but behind him officers trade worried glances. Historians still argue whether de Castries was confident to the end or whether he masked his doubts under stiff professionalism. Either way, you feel the unease seeping through the air like damp through canvas. A quirky detail: the French, in their effort to create comfort in this remote valley, had built a kind of officer's mess, complete with wicker chairs and decent wine. You imagine these same chairs now scuffed with mud, bottles unopened on the shelf because nobody's in the mood to toast. War has a way of making luxuries absurd. Who wants Bordeaux when the ridges above are spitting fire? Meanwhile, the rank and file are beginning to murmur. At first, they joke about the noise, about how they didn't expect to be the main characters in a fireworks show. But the jokes fade quickly. You wander past trenches where paratroopers smoke cigarettes with trembling hands, their helmets tipped low to hide their eyes. Some scribble letters they may never send. Others just stare into the mist, listening for the next barrage. You step outside the bunker and look toward the hills. The Viet Minh trenches are creeping closer, dug during the night, invisible until flares reveal them like scars across the landscape. Each day the lines inch forward. Each night the sounds of picks and shovels echo faintly. The French garrison can feel the valley tightening around them. Historians still debate whether the French High Command in Hanoi understood how dire the situation had become so early. Messages sent by radio were upbeat, speaking of resistance and resilience. But you can hear the weariness in the operators' voices as they crank the generators, their headphones buzzing with static. The fortress may look intact on paper, but down here it feels like a castle with its foundation already crumbling. Another quirky tidbit: some French soldiers, desperate to fight boredom between bombardments, organized makeshift soccer matches in the dust of the airstrip. Picture that. Men kicking a ball across a field while, in the distance, artillery shells boom like thunder. You almost laugh, except the ball rolls awkwardly over cratered earth, and the cheering sounds thin, like echoes in a cave. As you wander through the valley, you sense the shift in mood. The officers are defensive, the soldiers restless. Even the valley itself seems to press in tighter, the ridges looming more menacingly now that everyone knows guns are up there. And in the hills, Giap waits quietly, knowing that confidence cracked once will keep cracking. By the end of March 14th, French confidence is already shaken. Strong points are renamed vital, indispensable, as though words can make them stronger. But you notice the tremor in the hands holding the pens. The fortress isn't collapsing, not yet, but its aura of invincibility is gone. And once that slips, it's hard to get back. You lean against the cool earth of a trench wall, close your eyes, and let the murmur of tired voices fade into a low hum. The battle has only just begun. But already the French fortress feels less like a hunter's trap and more like a cage. The soldiers know it. The officers know it. And Giap, somewhere in the misty hills, is smiling softly, patient as the rain. The days blend together now, each one marked not by sweeping assaults but by the slow scrape of shovels. You crouch beside Viet Minh soldiers as they dig trench lines toward the French strongpoints, zigzagging ever closer. This is not the dramatic clash of charging infantry you might expect. It's more like gardening under fire, except the plants are earthworks sprouting across the valley floor. The soil is damp and stubborn, clinging to the wooden spades, but the work never stops. By night, lanterns shielded by cloth give off faint glows as men and women chip away at the earth. By day, they cover the trenches with camouflage and keep low when aircraft circle overhead. You watch as these trenches creep forward in jagged patterns, like the teeth of a saw slowly biting into the French positions. Historians still argue whether this trench warfare was inspired by World War I or developed independently from earlier guerrilla tactics. Whatever the origin, the effect is the same: a tightening embrace. The quirky fact: some soldiers nicknamed the trenches earthy hotels because they ate, slept, and even sang quietly inside them. You imagine someone humming a lullaby while spooning rice from a tin, the sound muffled by dirt walls. It's oddly cozy, if you ignore the occasional artillery shell shaking the ground above. From the French side, the experience is unnerving. You sit with paratroopers scanning the misty ground, knowing the enemy is digging but rarely seeing them. At night, they hear the faint scrape of tools, the murmur of voices carried on the wind. They fire flares into the darkness, machine guns rattling blindly, but by dawn new scars of earth are visible, closer than before. It's like watching shadows crawl toward you, slow and relentless. You climb into one of the new Viet Minh trenches, crouching low as dirt crumbles beneath your fingers. The men here joke that they are moles with rifles, and indeed the trench feels like a burrow, narrow, damp, and smelling faintly of smoke and sweat. One soldier points to the far end, barely lit, and says, "That way is Paris." You laugh softly, realizing the humor is all that keeps the monotony bearable. Historians still debate whether Giap's decision to extend trench warfare lengthened the siege unnecessarily, or whether it saved lives by avoiding costly frontal assaults. Either way, you can see why he insisted. The French are forced to fight on terms they never expected, a war of inches, not kilometers. Another odd tidbit drifts through the ranks. Some Viet Minh soldiers decorated their trench walls with little carvings or chalk drawings, birds, flowers, even stick-figure sketches of soldiers smiling. Imagine pausing between barrages to doodle on dirt as though turning the front line into a school notebook. It's almost tender, almost childlike, in the middle of a grinding siege. The French counter with artillery fire, pounding the jungle ridges and trench lines. The earth shakes, mud splatters, and sometimes entire trench sections cave in. Yet when the dust clears, shovels reappear, and the digging resumes. You lie in the trench, feeling the ground vibrate with each impact, realizing that this is not a battle of spectacle, but of persistence. The longer it drags on, the more it favors those willing to endure discomfort. Night falls again, and you close your eyes in the trench. The world shrinks to the rhythm of picks hitting soil, the soft whispers of men exchanging stories, and the faint hum of insects above. You remember the French soccer matches from before, and now you see the contrast. One side trying to escape boredom with games, the other side embracing boredom as a weapon. The valley is changing, reshaped one trench at a time. The fortress is no longer isolated. It's being pulled into a web of earth that grows tighter each night. And as you sink into the soil's embrace, it feels strangely like a cradle, rocking you slowly towards sleep, one shovel scrape at a time. Out. Rain begins to fall, soft at first, then steady, until the entire valley glistens with wet earth. You sit in a Viet Minh camp tucked under canvas sheets stretched between bamboo poles, listening to the patter overhead. Life under siege is not all roaring cannons and heroics. It is mostly this: damp socks, sticky rice, and the constant buzz of mosquitoes. You glance around at soldiers huddled in their ponchos, some smoking, some scribbling letters home, others simply staring into the rain with that glassy look that comes when exhaustion and boredom fuse into one. Food arrives in baskets carried from those endless supply lines you remember. A pot is set on the fire, smoke curling into the wet air. Tonight it's rice, salt, and maybe a scrap of dried fish if fortune is kind. A quirky fact surfaces. Sometimes the rations included fermented tofu wrapped in banana leaves, pungent enough to make you wrinkle your nose, but comforting if you grew up with it. Imagine opening your lunchbox to find a smell so strong even enemy soldiers might retreat from it. You sit cross-legged with them, spooning rice into your mouth. The taste is bland, but hunger makes it filling. Someone cracks a joke that the French down in the valley probably have cheese and wine, while here it's rice a la mud. Laughter ripples through the camp, brief but genuine, and then the rain drowns it out again. Historians still argue whether the morale of the Viet Minh was sustained more by ideology or by the sheer routine of daily survival. You lean toward the latter, watching a young soldier methodically patch his sandal with a strip of bamboo. Ideology doesn't keep your feet dry. Resourcefulness does. At night, the camp becomes a world of whispers. Fires are doused early to avoid drawing attention, so the only light comes from lanterns shielded by coats. Men lie side by side under tarps, trading quiet stories about their families, villages, or even rumors of peace talks far away in Geneva. Some hum lullabies from their childhoods, voices so soft they barely rise above the rain. You close your eyes and let those melodies drift over you like a quilt. The quirky tidbit you stumble on: some soldiers kept pet crickets in tiny bamboo cages, believing their chirping brought luck. Imagine an entire trench line filled with faint cricket songs, blending with the jungle's natural orchestra. You smile at the thought. War reduced to men sharing lullabies with insects. Meanwhile, life in the French garrison below is no more glamorous. Supplies are running tighter, and their meals often consist of tinned rations, cold and greasy. You wander through one bunker and see men spooning canned beef stew straight from the tin, faces drawn. A radio hums in the corner, playing faint jazz from Hanoi, the notes weirdly out of place in this mud-slick fortress. Some officers try to keep order with routines, parades, inspections, but the soldiers are restless, damp, and tired of sleeping in holes that smell of sweat and cordite. Historians still debate whether the French ever truly believed reinforcements would break the siege. Letters home suggest a mix. Some soldiers wrote confidently of relief, others confessed despair. One wrote that the valley felt like a bowl filling slowly with water. We are frogs who cannot jump out. Back in the Viet Minh camp, you feel the same metaphor in reverse. Patient frogs outside the bowl, waiting for the water to boil. Daily life is tedious, yes, but also steady. Rice is cooked, sandals patched, rifles cleaned. Boredom is a weapon, and these men wield it with quiet strength. The rain keeps falling, drumming on the canvas above your head, a rhythm so steady it blurs the lines between wakefulness and sleep. You lie back on the damp ground, listening to cricket songs and raindrops, and realize that in a siege, victory often belongs not to the strongest or loudest, but to the ones who can endure the silence longest. You tilt your head back toward the sky now, squinting through the mist as French planes drone overhead. They are supposed to be the fortress's lifeline, the wings that keep Điện Biên Phủ supplied with everything from ammunition to fresh bread. But today the sky looks stubborn, low clouds hang heavy, and sudden bursts of rain turn the valley airstrip into a swamp. The planes circle, engines humming, but half the time they can't even see the ground clearly enough to drop their loads with accuracy. You stand near the airstrip as a crate smashes into the mud, parachute dragging behind it like a deflated jellyfish. The soldiers cheer at first, thinking it's food, only to discover it's barbed wire. One man sighs and mutters something unprintable under his breath. A quirky fact emerges. Sometimes the supply drops landed right in Viet Minh lines, and enemy troops gleefully opened crates stamped with French labels. Imagine hauling tons of rice for weeks only to have the French Air Force deliver extra for you, gift-wrapped by mistake. Historians still argue whether the French logistics staff underestimated the weather patterns or whether they simply had no choice but to gamble. Either way, the results are patchy. Some days planes manage to land, but each time the strip grows more cratered and muddy. Other days, supplies fall wildly off target, scattering across jungle and hillside. You picture a soldier trudging a kilometre to retrieve a parachute stuck in a tree, muttering about how resupply feels more like a scavenger hunt than an organised plan. In the trenches, Viet Minh soldiers listen to the buzz overhead. They know each plane means more food or ammunition for the enemy, but also more targets. Anti-aircraft fire begins to lace the sky, black puffs bursting among the clouds. You duck instinctively, though the shells are far above, and watch one French transport wobble, trailing smoke, before limping back down the valley. The roar of cheers from the hillside carries across the valley floor. A quirky tidbit, some French soldiers joked grimly that they were eating more parachute silk than real food, because so many meals came dropped in crates tied to silk canopies. Silk became mattresses, bandages, even makeshift clothing. The fortress started to look like a bizarre carnival, silk fluttering from trees and barbed wire alike. The mood inside the French garrison begins to sink. Cigarettes are rationed, tinned food grows monotonous, and the sky, once their ally, feels like an unreliable friend. You wander through a bunker where men listen to radios crackling with news from outside. They hear rumours of reinforcements, whispers of relief columns, but every day the jungle seems thicker, the rains heavier, and the ridges more alive with enemy guns. Historians still debate whether a major relief attempt could have saved Điện Biên Phủ. Some argue that with more planes, more men, the fortress might have held. Others point to the relentless mud, the fog, the sheer impossibility of sustaining thousands of troops in such an isolated bowl. You stand in the damp airstrip mud and realize that arguments are easy on paper, but here, with rain dripping off helmets and crates landing in the wrong valley, reality is stubborn. Back in the Viet Minh camp, the sound of planes is greeted with shrugs. Sometimes a crate drifts down into their lines and suddenly dinner is more plentiful than expected. Other times they grin at the sight of anti-aircraft fire finding its mark. For them, the sky is no longer a French monopoly. It's contested, unreliable, and increasingly tilted in their favour. As night falls, you look up one last time. The stars are hidden by clouds, the moon a faint glow. The valley sleeps fitfully, men muttering in trenches, officers staring at maps by lamplight, pilots circling above with dwindling fuel. And you, lying back on the damp ground, feel the hum of propellers fade into a lull, like a tired insect drifting away into the mist. You climb with the Viet Minh soldiers toward the ridges known simply as the hills. Each one has a name on the French maps, Eliane, Dominique, Claudine, but the soldiers around you prefer letters and numbers, blunt and practical. Tonight the attention fixes on Hill A1, a steep rise of earth and bunkers that overlooks the entire fortress. You feel the strain in your calves as you scramble upward, imagining what it means. Whoever holds this hill controls not just a patch of dirt, but the valley's fate. The air grows tense as the assault begins. Artillery booms from the ridges, shells ripping through the darkness. You duck into a trench carved up the slope, crouching low as bursts of light reveal flashes of helmets and bayonets. The French defenders fire from bunkers perched like stubborn barnacles on the hillside. Historians still argue whether A1 was the single most decisive position of the siege, or just one of many. But in the moment, you can feel its importance with every heartbeat. The hill is the hinge of the entire valley. A quirky detail. Some Viet Minh sappers carried bundles of bamboo poles tipped with explosives, crawling forward like gardeners planting strange seeds. They inched toward wire and bunkers, sliding through mud, sparks threatening to give them away. Imagine being told your job is to dig under an enemy bunker and pack it with explosives while shells rain overhead. You shiver at the thought, grateful that your bedtime story only demands imagination, not bravery. The French cling desperately to A1 and neighbouring strongpoints like C1. Their machine guns chatter through the night, sweeping the slopes. You hear shouted commands in French, whistles, and the guttural rhythm of rifles firing until barrels glow. Inside their bunkers, the defenders swat at mud dripping from the ceiling, reload frantically, and brace for the next wave. The fighting becomes a rhythm. Viet Minh troops surge, dig in, then surge again. The French fire, counterattack, then retreat deeper into their bunkers. The hill changes hands, not once but several times, each assault leaving the slopes scarred with new craters, the air thick with cordite. You stumble as the ground shakes beneath your feet, each explosion pounding your chest like a drum. Historians still debate the timing of when A1 finally tipped. Some records suggest days of back and forth. Others emphasize one decisive night when Viet Minh sappers tunneled beneath and detonated massive charges, collapsing bunkers from below. Either way, the image remains vivid, earth erupting upward, fire spewing skyward, and suddenly the hill is no longer held by the French. And yet amid this chaos, a quirky moment arises. Soldiers crawling through trenches sometimes found themselves face to face with French defenders just a few feet away, separated only by thin walls of dirt. Stories tell of awkward silences, muttered curses, and even brief pauses before the fighting resumed. Imagine crouching in mud, hearing your enemy sneeze through the earth beside you. You wipe grime from your face, your ears ringing from the blasts, as dawn begins to spread pale light over the valley. The hill is still contested, still scarred, but the French grip is slipping. From below, their fortress looks diminished, its crown of hills chipped away. From above, Giap's officers watch with grim satisfaction, knowing that control of these high points is slowly, inexorably shifting. The valley seems quieter after the night's fury, though you know it's only a pause. Smoke hangs over A1 like a blanket, and the ground is littered with shattered timber and twisted wire. Soldiers rest where they can, slumped in trenches, helmets tilted forward. You lean back against the damp slope, eyes heavy, realizing that battles for hills are not measured in grandeur but in inches, sweat and sleeplessness. And as you drift, you hear the faint sound of shovels again, always shovels, carving deeper into the slope, inching closer still. The hills are bleeding, but they are also changing hands, and with each meter gained, the fortress below sinks deeper into inevitability. You find yourself once more near Giap's command post, tucked beneath the dripping canopy of the hills. The night air is heavy, lanterns glow faintly through layers of canvas, and maps lie spread on the ground like a patchwork quilt. Around him, staff officers murmur figures, casualty reports and requests for reinforcements. You lean closer, and you sense the weight pressing on Giap's shoulders. Victories have been won, hills captured, trenches pushed forward, but the cost has been high. He listens silently as one officer lists the number of men lost in the last assault. The figures are not abstract here. They are faces, brothers, sons. Giap stares at the map but seems to look through it, eyes clouded with calculation and doubt. Historians still argue whether this was the moment he nearly faltered, when the losses made him question if the slow siege would drag on too long, draining morale. Some accounts suggest he considered pausing the offensive entirely. Others insist his resolve never wavered. You watch him in that silence and feel the truth. Even the strongest commanders wrestle with doubt. A quirky detail emerges. Giap, the people's general, was known for pacing when deep in thought, tracing circles in the dirt with his boots until others had to step aside. Tonight, the ground outside his tent is already etched with loops and spirals, like a private map of his worry. You imagine future archaeologists scratching their heads over mysterious circles left in the mud, never guessing they were made by a general pacing through sleepless nights. Giap stops pacing and listens to another report. French counterattacks are faltering, their supplies dwindling. The siege is working, but slowly. The temptation is there, to rush, to finish it, to throw everything forward in one massive push. Yet Giap has already resisted that temptation once, back when he shifted from quick victory to steady advance. You watch him take a long breath, steadying himself, and then speak quietly. They will hold to the plan. Slow, deliberate, patient. In the trenches, soldiers feel this tension too. Some whisper that the general is cautious to a fault, others that his caution is saving their lives. You crouch beside one man as he sharpens his bayonet, the sound rasping softly like sandpaper. He shrugs and says, "Better slow rice than fast hunger." It's a soldier's proverb, and it sticks with you. Victory tastes better when you're alive to eat it. Historians still debate how much Giap relied on advice from his Chinese allies, who provided guidance and supplies. Some say he leaned heavily on their counsel. Others argue he made decisions independently. What you see, though, is a man balancing not just military advice but human cost, weighing every assault against the bodies it will claim. The quirky tidbit: Giap was known to keep a small notebook where he jotted down observations, sometimes blending strategy with poetry. Imagine flipping through pages that describe artillery placements one moment, and a line about mist curling over the hills the next. It's a reminder that even in war, the human mind drifts toward beauty. You step outside again, into the chill air. The valley lies below, dotted with bursts of light from occasional gunfire. The French strongpoints flicker like tired candles, their garrisons straining to hold out. You realize that Giap's patience isn't just about tactics, it's psychological warfare. Each day the French wake up, a little more demoralized, a little more certain that relief will never come. Back in the command post, Giap returns to his maps, voice calm but firm. Orders go out, more trenches, more pressure, no reckless charges. His staff scribble notes, radios buzz with transmissions, and the wheels of the siege grind on. You watch him finally sit, shoulders easing just slightly, and you know he has chosen patience again. You sink into the damp earth yourself, eyelids heavy, and let the rhythm of the rain and distant artillery carry you. The valley holds its breath, stretched between exhaustion and resolve. And in that fragile quiet, Giap's decision echoes, no haste, no gamble, only the steady weight of time pressing down on the fortress below. You drift closer to the French lines now, following the low murmur of weariness that hangs like fog over their trenches. You can tell when morale starts to slip. Voices flatten, jokes get recycled, cigarettes burn down to the filter without anyone noticing. A paratrooper sits with his back to a sandbag wall, letter on his knee, pencil looping slowly as if each word has to be coaxed into existence. He pauses, looking up at the sky as though the clouds might deliver an answer. Then he writes again, "Nous tenons." We're holding. The phrase feels brave and brittle at the same time, like glass warmed by a camp stove. The bunker smells of damp wool and cordite. A radio hisses with snatches of music, some tinny swing that would be better suited to a Paris cafe than this muddy bowl. Once upon a time, the wicker chairs in the officers' mess felt like a civilized touch. Now they look like props from a summer holiday abandoned in a monsoon. A corporal nudges one with his boot and jokes that it's combat wicker, officially tested to withstand artillery-adjacent sulking. It earns a brief, grateful laugh, the kind of humour you ration more carefully than tinned peaches. You glance at the airstrip, more cratered garden than runway, and watch men chase a parachute that has snagged on barbed wire. The crate thumps down. Hope flickers. Someone calls out for bread, someone else calls for cigarettes. The lid prees open and spare radio parts stare back like an unfunny punchline. You get your first joke of the night from a sergeant who sighs, "Excellent. We can now assemble a perfectly supplied radio to announce we have no food. You add a mental drum roll and a rim shot. Even the valley seems too tired to deliver one. Mainstream fact drops into place like another crate. Attrition is winning. The fortress is under constant pressure. Supply drops are erratic, the runway unreliable, and medical support stretched thin. Historians still argue whether a bold relief operation, some sweeping column through jungle and mountains, could have altered the outcome, or whether the terrain, weather, and Giap's grip made any such plan a fantasy written in optimistic ink. Down here, the debate feels academic. The men care about soup, dry socks, and a letter that doesn't sound like a goodbye. A young radio operator rubs his eyes and leans closer to the set. He is pale with fatigue, fingers stained with oil. He listens for code that might be reassurance and hears only static and distant promises. You sit beside him and feel the room's quiet, heavy, padded with damp blankets and the thud of shells somewhere you've learned to call not too near. The operator cracks a grin and tells you his favorite superstition. We're safe as long as my lucky parachute silk stays under the set. He lifts one corner to show a frayed square of silk, stained with coffee, the unbeautiful talisman of a siege. Quirky tidbit, someone in the garrison has cut parachute silk into little handkerchiefs embroidering initials in bright thread EDC for the strongpoints named Eliane, Dominique, Claudine. Officers pretend not to notice these tiny banners dangling from belt loops and mess kits, but the silk squares flutter through the trench lines like secret flags, a soft reminder of where you belong when the map grows blurry. It's both tender and slightly ridiculous, which, you admit, is an excellent summary of human morale under stress. You join a group of men in a dugout, the kind of room that collects damp the way your phone collects unread notifications. One paratrooper reads aloud from a letter. His wife has sent news of spring in Provence, almonds blooming, a bicycle fixed, a new recipe for sardines with lemon. He pauses over bicycle, and you can't help flashing back to those bicycles up in the jungle, groaning under mountains of rice. You want to tell him that his word has two lives now, one in a French kitchen, one in a Vietnamese mountainside. Both are about endurance, both squeak a little under load. By candlelight, an officer writes a report he will phrase carefully, something like morale challenged but intact. You can hear him editing as he goes, snipping out the heavy words and replacing them with light ones, like trying to swap stones for feathers in a rucksack. You almost want to lean over and whisper that no report ever saved a soldier's sleep, but then you remember the power of paperwork in a fortress. It's the thin thread tying this muddy world to a larger one that might yet care. Historians still argue whether de Castries retained genuine confidence through these weeks, or learned to perform it for others. You watch him stride through a trench, nodding, clapping a shoulder, offering the same firm phrase, "No tenons," and you decide the distinction hardly matters. Leadership is sometimes theatre, and the audience is asking for reassurance, not reviews. For the second light joke, you file away the thought that if morale were a movie, this week would be sponsored by lukewarm coffee and a very persistent fog machine. Night deepens. You hear whispers of inevitability, hush-hush conversations that circle the same questions. Will they land more reinforcements? Is there a column coming? How long can we last? A medic with red-rimmed eyes answers with logistics rather than sentiment. As long as we have gauze, salt, and canned milk. You appreciate the honesty. It'd make a terrible recruitment poster, but it works as a bedtime truth. Trench morale measured in pantry items. A chaplain passes by, soft-footed, offering a few words and a listening ear. He carries a small tin of candles. One soldier jokes they're for a birthday party, and the chaplain plays along, humming a bar or two of Joyeux anniversaire for no one in particular. For the third light joke, a paratrooper suggests they celebrate the airstrip's 1-week anniversary of being almost usable, and for a moment, Even the chaplain smiles. Humor is a kind of contraband that gets past any blockade. Mainstream fact returns as a steady drumbeat. Outside the wire, the Viet Minh trenches creep closer. On the ridges, artillery bites deeper. In the sky, weather keeps misbehaving. You remember that patient plan Giap settled on, the one that weaponizes boredom and mud, and you see its imprint everywhere. The French still patrol, still fight back, still hold. But the fortress feels less like a knight on a chessboard and more like a stone slowly settling into wet earth. You linger on one last image, a soldier folding his letter carefully, tucking it into a tin to keep it dry. He doesn't seal it, not yet. He's waiting for better words to come, news to sweeten the ending. Historians still argue whether hope is a variable commanders can truly manage or whether it belongs to the weather to rumor, to whatever song the radio decides to find. Down here, hope is smaller and sturdier. Warm hands around a metal mug, a joke that lands, a parachute silk square tucked like a secret. Back outside, the night is thick and humming. Somewhere a mortar thumps, somewhere else a man snores into his scarf. You stand at the trench's edge and listen to the rain begin again, gentle at first. It taps the sandbags, it rattles the duckboards, it drums a steady, sleepy rhythm. Not too loud, not too soft, just enough to make you think of roofs and kitchens and bicycles that squeak in familiar lanes. You breathe with it, slow and even, as if the valley itself were reminding everyone, French, Viet Minh you, that all sieges, like all nights, are outlasted one steady breath at a time. The valley trembles again, but this time it isn't only from distant artillery. You feel it beneath your boots, a pulse through the earth, like the ground itself has been holding its breath for weeks and is now exhaling violently. The final push has begun. Viet Minh sappers, crouched low with satchels of explosives and bundles of bamboo poles, move forward in a steady crawl. Their job is to slice through wire, plant charges, and break open the last shells of the French defences. You crouch with them, mud soaking into your sleeves, and watch as sparks flicker in the dark like fireflies. Explosives are jammed into the earth beneath bunkers, long fuses hissing faintly before disappearing underground. The French respond with flares that turn the valley into a stuttering daylight, every shape suddenly stark, every movement painfully clear. You duck, heart racing, as machine guns chatter from pillboxes. Historians still argue whether these final assaults could have been delayed further to bleed the French more, or whether Giap chose his moment precisely when morale was lowest and supply lines weakest. A quirky image lodges in your mind. Some sappers tied scarves around their helmets to make themselves look taller in the sudden flare light, hoping to scare French defenders into thinking reinforcements were surging in greater numbers. It's the kind of psychological trick you'd expect from a stage magician, but here it's life or death theatre in the mud. The French headquarters reels. Radios crackle frantically, maps are pushed aside as officers rush to the front lines. You stand near one strong point as shells crash down, the ground vibrating with such force it knocks helmets from heads. In the chaos, men shout over one another, their words breaking apart into fragments. Reinforce! Hold! They're in the wire! You taste smoke on your tongue, acrid and bitter, and feel your ears ringing as if the valley is roaring directly at you. Inside the trenches, Viet Minh soldiers press closer. Their bayonets glint in flare light, their uniforms plastered with mud until they look like moving shadows. One soldier pauses to adjust his sandal strap mid-assault, muttering a curse that makes his comrade laugh even under fire. You can't help but smile. War is absurd like that, demanding both terror and shoe repairs in the same breath. Historians still debate whether the French defenders could have mounted a coordinated counterattack during these last days. Some argue that their fragmented units, separated by collapsed trenches and cratered ground, made coordination impossible. Others believe de Castries lacked either the means or the will to rally. What you see now is less a coordinated defense than scattered pockets of resistance, each one burning out at its own pace. You move through the trenches as the assault continues. Explosions throw dirt in your face, the air chokes with dust, and still the Viet Minh push forward. Strong points that once seemed immovable shrink into battered holes. You watch as men pour into them, grenades thumping, rifles cracking. And then suddenly a silence falls. A bunker door is blown open, its interior dark and still. The position is gone. Another quirky tidbit. Amid the chaos, some Viet Minh soldiers used captured French bugles to signal advances. Imagine the disorienting sound of your own marching call echoing from the jungle, urging the enemy closer. The French defenders, dazed and exhausted, must have felt as if the valley itself was mocking them. The push is relentless. Each strong point is bitten into, torn apart, and absorbed into the growing ring of trenches. You hear officers calling for artillery support, but the guns are nearly silent now. Ammunition is short, barrels worn. The fortress that once roared like thunder now mutters like an old man in his sleep. By dawn, the assault has carved deep wounds into the French lines. Smoke curls upward from shattered bunkers, and the air smells of wet earth and cordite. Soldiers slump in trenches, eyes hollow, rifles limp in their hands. The valley feels smaller, tighter, as though the walls of earth have closed in a little more with each passing hour. You lean against the splintered remains of a post, chest heaving, and feel the weight of inevitability pressing down. The fortress has withstood weeks of pressure, but now the cracks are gaping, and the heart of the stronghold trembles. The final act is not far away. You can sense it in the silence between barrages, in the weary way French officers clutch their maps, in the calm determination etched into the faces of Giap's soldiers. And as you close your eyes for a moment, the valley seems to whisper, the end is near, the cage is closing, and history is about to tip. You drift toward the heart of the fortress now, where the command post of Colonel Christian de Castries sits, half buried in earth and sandbags. Once it was orderly, maps pinned neatly, telephones at the ready, officers in pressed uniforms. Now it looks more like a collapsed cellar after a flood. Papers scattered, radios buzzing faintly with static, candles guttering in the stale air. You step inside just as the last threads of command are unraveling. Above ground, the final storm is breaking. Viet Minh infantry surge across the last stretches of trench and wire, sappers blasting holes through what's left of bunkers. You hear explosions like doors being slammed by giants, one after another, until the valley echoes like a drum. Historians still argue whether the French defenders could have fought on for another day or two, or whether surrender was already inevitable the moment the Viet Minh reached the command post perimeter. To you, standing here, inevitability feels thick in the air, as though even the walls know their time is up. De Castries sits at a desk, his uniform mud-streaked, his face drawn. He speaks quietly to his staff, voice more resigned than defiant. A quirky detail. Reports claim that when surrender came, he requested to be allowed to send a final message to his wife. The French High Command had urged him for weeks to hold fast, and now his last words on the radio were not for generals, but for the woman waiting in Paris. It's strangely human, this soft ending to such a loud battle. You step outside and watch as the tricolour flag, battered by weeks of rain and shrapnel, begins to lower. In its place, Viet Minh banners rise, red against the grey mist. The moment is both quiet and monumental. No fanfare, no orchestra. Just the ragged cheer of exhausted soldiers who have carried rice, dug trenches, and hauled cannons for months. French prisoners shuffle out of bunkers, stunned and silent. They look around as though the valley itself has betrayed them, as though the hills had been conspiring all along. Some are dazed, some angry, some simply too tired to feel anything at all. A paratrooper stumbles past, muttering in disbelief. "C'est fini? Is it finished?" His comrade doesn't answer, just nods slowly. Meanwhile, Viet Minh soldiers grin through mud-streaked faces, their voices hoarse from shouting, their uniforms patched and torn. They look nothing like the polished armies of European textbooks, but they have accomplished what seemed impossible, dragging a colonial fortress to its knees. One soldier picks up a French bugle and gives it a triumphant toot, the sound comically off-key. You chuckle softly at the absurdity. A battle ending not with trumpets of glory, but with a squeaky note that sounds more like a duck than a fanfare. Historians still debate the symbolism of de Castries' capture. Some say it marked the definitive end of French colonial illusions in Indochina. Others argue it was simply one chapter, dramatic but not decisive, in a larger decolonization. You just see the man himself, weary and mud-streaked, walking out of his bunker to meet Giap's officers. No grand speeches, no cinematic last stand, just the heavy shuffle of boots and the quiet surrender of a flag. A quirky tidbit lingers. When Viet Minh soldiers entered the command post, they found bottles of wine still stacked in crates. Some accounts suggest they toasted their victory with French vintage, raising glasses in mud-streaked hands. Imagine that. Peasants who had dragged bicycles through mountains now clinking crystal with Bordeaux, history's toast poured in mismatched cups. The valley exhales, guns fall silent, smoke drifts lazily upward, and for the first time in weeks, no shells explode, no flares burst. You feel the silence settling like a blanket, heavy and strange. It's not peace exactly, too many memories hang in the air, but it is an ending. You close your eyes, hearing only the shuffling of prisoners, the murmur of soldiers, and the faint whistle of wind through trenches. The tricolour is down, the red banner is up, and the long siege has resolved into this quiet, stunned moment. History has shifted, almost gently, though the valley still smells of cordite and rain. The valley is still now, a silence so complete it almost hums. Trenches that once crawled with soldiers sit half-collapsed, puddles reflecting the grey sky. The smoke has thinned into mist, rising like breath from a body finally at rest. You walk slowly among the ruins, hearing only the squelch of your own steps and the occasional murmur of men too tired to speak above a whisper. The siege is finished, but its echo is only just beginning. French prisoners sit in clusters, some with bandaged heads, others staring blankly at the ground. They look more like travellers stranded in bad weather than soldiers defeated in battle. One fiddles with a parachute silk handkerchief, smoothing it against his knee as if the fabric might anchor him to a world beyond this valley. Historians still argue how many of these men ever made it home again. Some did through prisoner exchanges, others did not, their names lost in paperwork and fading memory. Meanwhile, Giap soldiers move through the trenches with quiet efficiency, clearing debris, tending to wounded, stacking captured rifles. Their victory feels less like triumph and more like deep relief. A quirky sight catches your eye. Two young soldiers balancing on an abandoned French bicycle, laughing as they wobble along the muddy path. It's almost absurd, this image of joy emerging in a place soaked with weeks of exhaustion. Yet it fits, life insisting on itself even in the shadow of war. You think of Giap himself, calm and composed in his command post. He does not strut, does not shout. Accounts suggest he simply nodded when informed of de Castries' capture, then turned back to his staff, already thinking about Geneva, about the next stage of struggle, about the long arc of independence still ahead. Historians still debate whether he foresaw just how symbolic Điện Biên Phủ would become, or whether he thought only of the immediate task. Either way, his patience and strategy have carved a chapter that echoes far beyond this valley, and indeed the echo travels quickly. News rushes across Indochina, across Paris, across the world. In Geneva, negotiators suddenly shift their tone, recognizing that the colonial game has changed. In capitals far away, leaders murmur about dominoes, about movements that cannot be contained, about the twilight of empires. You sense it. The sound of shovels and bicycles and bamboo-tied cannons is louder now than any marching band. A quirky tidbit lingers in the aftermath. French journalists later joked that the battle could be summarized by 3 unlikely heroes: bicycles, sandals, and shovels. Not glamorous, not mechanical marvels, just ordinary objects wielded with extraordinary persistence. And maybe that's the point. History, in the end, is often written by the patient, not the flashy. You stroll once more through the valley, past broken bunkers and quiet camps. The air feels softer now, no longer vibrating with shells. The rain has paused, and for a moment birds return, timid, hesitant, but singing. Their notes drift over the mud and wire like a reminder that life doesn't wait for treaties. Historians still argue what Điện Biên Phủ means in the grand scale of things. Was it the death of French Indochina? The spark for global decolonization? A prelude to new wars yet to come? For you, standing here in the hush, it feels simpler. It is proof that patience, persistence, and even boredom can topple fortresses. The valley exhales one last time, and you follow that breath outward, drifting from the mud, from the trenches, from the exhausted faces of victors and prisoners alike. And now, as promised, the story slows, softens, and turns into a lullaby. You can feel your own breath sinking with the valley's rhythm, long, steady, unhurried. The battle is finished, the noise is gone, and only quiet remains. Close your eyes and picture the mist curling gently over green hills. The trenches fill slowly with rainwater, smoothing into streams, erasing sharp edges. Parachute silk flutters faintly in the breeze, now nothing more than fabric catching sunlight. The birdsong grows a little clearer, each note stretched, each pause longer, like time itself is yawning and settling into rest. You let the images drift further away, cannons hidden in jungle ridges, soldiers tugging bicycles through mud, letters half-written in bunkers. They fade into the mist, not lost, just quieter, tucked into the soft folds of memory. The fortress that once thundered now dozes like an old house after guests have left, doors creaking softly, floors sighing. Breathe in, slow and deep. Breathe out, slower still. Feel the rhythm of rain on leaves, the hush of wind over grass, the gentle lull of silence wrapping you like a blanket. The story has ended, but its calm lingers, carrying you into your own night. And so, with the valley at peace and the echoes fading, I'll leave you here, resting, drifting, safe in the quiet after the storm. Sweet dreams, word count 99, 302, wind down, equals, open quote.